I've really been into the look of clothes rendered in a realistic style, but I like drawing anime. So is there a way to integrate realistic rendering while still drawing anime? And then I got it. Who better to study than an artist who was so good he was supporting his family with his paintings at the age of 10? An artist who drew kings. So today I'm going to share with you how I learned to draw realistic clothes while still drawing in an anime style. Thomas Lawrence was a British portrait artist born in 1769. When he was 18, he moved to London to start his career as an oil portrait painter. His paintings are in a realistic style, but there is something just so unreal about how perfect the light hits and highlights the faces, while simultaneously the folds of the clothing look so perfectly draped but realistic. It's not hyperrealism in a sense that it was painted to look like a one-to-one of reality. The brushstrokes are still there, but there are stylistic choices he made to make portraits look as beautiful as possible. While sometimes there's one main spotlight, he frequently makes paintings with lighting that comes from many different light sources with all different directions, positioned specifically to highlight various parts of the figure, like the face and hands, while strategically keeping clothing half in light and shadow in order to show off the folds and materials of the clothing. Areas in direct light have harsh shadows and sharp edges, while the boundaries of clothing in shadow almost melts into the background, brushstrokes that blur color into each other. Speaking of the backgrounds, while it's usually darker than most of the figure, there are always these spots of brightness or light that keeps portraits from being one-dimensional and plain. Thomas Lawrence uses all these factors to create realistically rendered yet perfect portraits. So with all these notes in mind, I'm going to create a painting inspired by Thomas Lawrence's paintings. Starting with a rough sketch. Obviously, this is not going to be fully realistic since anime plus realism doesn't really mix. The main thing I'm focusing on in this rough is the proportion of limbs and overall placement on the canvas. After the main body parts are done, I draw in the actual facial features and then the flow of the hair. I find painting the hair and imagining them as ribbon-like strands is a simple, easy way to draw a lot of detail quickly. Drawing the body underneath first allows me to draw clothing partially from imagination by first drawing the parts where the clothes are touching the body and following the flow of the folds down. In the actual painting step, we're going for semi-realism, so none of these lines will be there in the final painting. But this technique helps to visualize where the folds are in 3D space, from the points of tension in the fabric to where it hangs down on the body where the free edges are pulled down by gravity. I find sleeves the most difficult, so I start with them first and then continue with the rest of the body. Since the bottom of the sweater has a more fitted rim, I add lines indicating the fabric is folding in on itself, and leave less folds in the middle of the torso because the zipper is usually stiffer than the fabric, so any fabric around it will be spread out, which means less folds around the zipper. For the skirt, I'm starting from where the fabric contacts the body and then following the tension down. The edge of the skirt is free to flow in the wind, so I pull it to the right, which causes more wrinkles horizontally. Whenever fabric wants to go in a different direction, it needs a fold. Okay, next is the line art, but technically, this is just a less rough, more cleaned up sketch, because I'm mostly going to paint over it later on. I start with the hardest parts first, so the face and hands, which gives me motivation to finish the rest. Because I plan to paint over all the folds, I only draw the outline of the clothing, and I'm not bothering with varying the line width, which would be much more important if I wasn't going for the semi-realistic rendering. I finish the hair last before I clean up the sketch, connecting any gaps so that I can paint bucket the different areas I want to color. An easy way to select and paint bucket the character is to select the area around the sketch and invert the selection. Then I separate the different areas I'm paint bucketing onto different layers, sorting by material and color. So all of the parts of the pink sweater are on one layer, the skirt is on another layer, and so on. This method is my favorite because it makes it so much more convenient later on when I'm adding color. Now that every part of the character is covered and organized, I can start on the grayscale. I do this so that I have a rough feeling of the values, or how light and dark the painting is. I'm following the way values are grouped in Thomas Lawrence's paintings. So a very bright light illuminating the face and half the body, with another less bright light focused on the hands. To paint the different materials, I add a layer on top of the layer I want to paint and clip it down. For the clothing, I start with the big areas first, blurring the edges, and the shadows of the folds are painted using the rough I made earlier as a guide. I leave it very rough, not bothering with the teeny tiny folds because I'm going to refine it later. Onto the background grayscale. I change to a very rough brush at half opacity because I want texture and the ability to lay the color over and over. In many of Thomas Lawrence's paintings, if you pay attention to the way the light falls, you'll realize a lot of his paintings break common sense, but in a way that makes them look really good. Here's what I mean. The spotlight on this face is almost a full frontal light, and the brightness should show on the fabric behind him, but he purposely does not add it, probably to increase the contrast between the face and the background. The light shining onto the red curtain on the back is a different source of light coming from the left side, and is unrelated to the front light, and so is this light only used on the hand. But all of these sources of light follow the pattern of coming from the left side of the painting, so it doesn't look out of place. So to follow the style, I paint a background that's mostly dark with a bright light coming from one side of the character. The spotlight on the character doesn't necessarily need to make sense and show in the background. I was initially thinking of painting a school rooftop, but then I changed it to the sidewalk on the pier. The guitar case is covering the source of light, so it let me add a rim light over the edge. Now to add color. I mask the areas I want colored on each separate gradient map for each material. For each gradient map, I keep the initial colors less saturated and keep it simple with the shadows being darker versions of the areas in the light with the hue a little bit shifted. I'm going to add most of the saturation and contrast later with different layer modes. I can add a tone curve to modify the colors and make it a little warm toned. The background is even more simple with only one gradient map affecting the whole area, and I only use orange and blue to give the overall temperature of the lighting. The base colors are done, so now it's time to make the colors look more unified and to paint over the entire character. First, I add a tone curve clipped to the character to adjust the colors all at once. I use an overlay layer to add more saturation to the skin, such as the blush, and a hard light layer to add color to the eyes. Over top all that, on a normal layer, I paint on more contrast to pull you to the eyes, and then start moving back and forth between painting the hair and the face. On the overlay, I paint on warm colors into the highlights and dark pinks into the shadows to make the hair look vibrant but soft. A small tip, you can select the area you're working on and go to View to turn off the selection border. It's still selected and we're only painting on the selected area, but it's much easier to look at. I add more strands in the hair by painting on a normal layer over top everything before moving on to the clothes. Again, I add saturation by painting a bit on the overlay layer, and then I paint and refine the clothes more carefully, following the rough, but this time painting over the outline, adding more detail like the smaller folds near the zipper. Because the basic color and brightness is already done, it's a very smooth process. All I need to do is color pick from the colors already on the canvas and focus entirely on painting without worrying if the colors match. And now to paint the background. I use hard light to add blue to the sky and paint on a normal layer to simplify some of the ends of the hair strands. I add a mask on the folder containing the layers of the character, and on the mask, I use a rough brush to erase the areas so her hair looks like it's blurring into the background. Back to the background, I paint on multiply and soft light layers to add more color variations, and for the final touches, I adjust the colors of the entire painting with a tone curve layer to make the color and background more cohesive. And after all of that, this is the final painting inspired by Thomas Lawrence, an anime. This was really fun to make, but I think the background is still a little too rough, so the balance is a little bit off. If I were to do this again, I'd probably find a rough brush to add texture onto the character herself, so that the whole painting can have more cohesion. The lighting is interesting. It looks like a photo shoot type of lighting where there's a very bright artificial light on her, So maybe I went overboard with that. Obviously, it wasn't gonna be as good as Thomas Lawrence. Again, he was a 10-year-old prodigy, but I learned a lot about how pros intentionally play with lighting with their paintings, so I want to experiment and paint more in the future. Thanks for watching. Okay, see ya!